Welcome to the Friday subscribers-only edition of the Hub Dialogues, the podcast of the Hub, Canada's leading source for insight and analysis into the big issues and ideas driving the public conversation. On these special Friday-only broadcasts, we're going to be convening Sean Speer, our editor-at-large, and Stuart Thompson, our editor-in-chief, for a conversation with me, Rudyard Griffiths, about the big stories and issues that have animated the public conversation over the last 7 days. Our goal is to leave you with some new analysis and insights, and hopefully some new perspectives on the big issues of our time. So pull up a chair right now and join Sean Speer, Stuart Thompson, and myself for the Friday subscriber-only edition of the Hub Dialogues. Stuart, Sean, great to be in conversation with you on this Friday of a holiday long weekend, the second to last long weekend of the summer. Stuart, what's going to go on in the Thompson household?
Not much. That's my plan for this weekend, is as little as possible. It won't come off, but we're going to try our best.
Okay, you're an avid jogger, so how many K are you going for this weekend?
I'm coming off an injury, so this is the week of the long run, so we'll see. Maybe I can do 15 on Sunday.
Nice.
Or I will fail miserably and be injured for the rest of August.
Okay, Sean, are you joining Stuart for the 15K? I don't know what that is. A third of a marathon.
We should start an internal plan where I match his miles and beers. I'm on a bit of a suicide mission today, guys. My wife and I are taking our 18-month-old to the Ottawa airport to fly off to see his grandparents and great-grandparents in Thunder Bay. So wish us luck. I'll send
Godspeed.
Yeah, exactly.
The suicide mission, Sean, would be to drive with an 18-year-old from Ottawa to North Bay. That would be the suicide mission. Guys, a lot of great topics for us to dig into this week. We always try to kind of explore two issues and events in the news that we think are important at the Hub, hopefully leaving our audience with some new insights. I want to start with the big news out of the Conservative Party leadership race this week of an endorsement, frankly, a bit of a surprise endorsement by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper of Pierre Poilievre. Many people obviously noted this. It's the first time really since Harper stepped down that he has in any kind of overt way come forward and endorsed a candidate in a leadership race. And as we like to here at the Hub, let's kick this around and try to figure out what's the dynamic here, what's going on, why in the, whatever this is, the last week of July, fully 6+ weeks ahead of the actual vote, is this all-important endorsement coming down? Stuart, what's your theory? I have my own, but let's go around the horn.
So I think the least interesting part of this is that he endorsed Poilievre. I think we all could have guessed that was his preferred candidate, and that, if it was an anti-endorsement, it was an endorsement against Charest. I think that's pretty obvious. The question of why, I think, is really interesting. And I actually think that Harper is one of those guys that, he's kind of an enigma sometimes. This is the kind of thing I don't expect to leak, like his exact intentions. And I think, we'll probably live in the world of speculation for a little while at least. But if I were guessing, I would say, we were sort of getting into the midst of an elite freakout in the Conservative Party. This sort of, centralized conservative thing where they're getting sort of a centrist conference together, and Marjorie Le Breton was expressing concerns about Poilievre. I think there was a few people getting cold feet. And I think if you were to look at this as sort of a indication from Harper that, he thinks that Poilievre is fine, and that actually not just fine, but is the best chance of beating Trudeau. It's a signal to these people that maybe they should reconsider, maybe they should get out of that bubble a little bit and see what the rest of the party and the country thinks of Poilievre. I think right now he's still an unknown quantity to a lot of Canada. And I think Harper's been there himself, and he attracted a lot of fairly hostile media in the early days of his leadership. So you can imagine that he understands the kind of situation that Poilievre is in right now.
Sean, what's your take? You work for Harper. Of all of us, you have a measure of this guy. why now?
Yeah, I should start by emphasizing that I had no pre-knowledge or advance warning of this endorsement, or we would have tried to get it at the Hub, not a video in a boardroom in Western Canada. I think there's a lot to what Stuart says. I think one thing that people probably underestimate about former Prime Minister Harper is how integral the Conservative Party of Canada is to his personal and political legacy. Remember, he is the one with Peter MacKay who put this party together and then stood it up in time to compete in the 2004 election, and then, of course, ultimately to govern for almost a decade. And as Stuart says, in recent days and weeks, there's been growing conversation about fracturing on the right, in effect, undoing this legacy of the former prime ministers. One thing that people often forget is that at its peak, the Reform Party was doing only about 17% nationally. So you can get fracturing with new or different center-right parties only getting a relatively small share of the national popular vote. And I think there's a world, for instance, we've talked about this on previous episodes, where under a Charest-led Conservative Party, the PPC's, the People's Party of Canada's popular vote could go from 5% in 2021 to what in the next election? 10%, 12%, 15%. For all intents and purposes, that would be undoing the legacy of a united right in Canada. So for all of those reasons, I think that this week's announcement is as much about protecting the legacy of Stephen Harper and the unity of the Canadian Conservative movement as it is anything about Pierre Poilievre or Jean Charest for that matter.
Yeah, I agree with those points. I'm curious what you guys think, though, about the timing. I wonder, Stuart, and again, this is just conjecture, but I wonder if the Poilievre campaign was seeing some numbers that they didn't like in terms of the activation of the new members that they brought to this party. Because let's remember, these are 300,000 plus new members, not all of them, but a lot of them who've got, ginned up on truckers' protests and anti-mandate mandates and the World Economic Forum. I don't know how much these folks are going to like the idea, which is required by the Conservative Party, of photocopying your driver's license on a physical piece of paper, like a little cumbersome, sticking that in the mail, mailing it to party HQ to become, in a sense, verified to vote. Could there have been a scenario here, maybe where the Poilievre campaign saw, a Charest campaign doing well in Quebec, competitive in Ontario, Poilievre struggling to get out his vote in those regions, being over-indexed in Western Canada, and further to your point, creating a narrative, if and when the vote happened, that in a sense Poilievre was a divider, not a uniter, and that the party, in a sense, while maybe not in name, in reality, was splitting. Again, a lot of conjecture here, but I wonder about the timing of this. To me, it seems like the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, is trying to get the existing party membership, which would be more equitably distributed in Ontario and Quebec, out voting for Poilievre before either Charest or the clock, closes the door on the ability to present Poilievre as not only the winner, but the winner of a united Conservative Party.
Yeah, I think that is very astute. I think that's definitely something to consider here. And actually, I did speak to somebody in the Poilievre campaign, and this was, months ago at this point, where I said, you're doing these rallies. Nobody will be upset at having huge rallies, but you are attracting a crowd that is very suspicious of authority. And that exact thing about photocopying your driver's license, we talked about that, and they admitted that it might be a problem. It might be something that is, creates a burn rate on these members that will be a little higher than the other candidates. So it is something that they've thought about. The other thing that I would mention is that Pierre Poilievre, I actually happen to be right next to his riding. I'm pretty familiar with the dynamics there, and I'm pretty familiar with how Poilievre himself has handled that riding, which is that he just never stopped campaigning and working and knocking on doors. It's kind of in his nature. When he worked on committees, he was always one of the hardest working guys on the committee, maybe even in the party, maybe even on the Hill. And he just never stopped. He always felt like he was about to lose. And that energy made him just, do one more hour of door knocking. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Poilievre campaign, although they're confident, and at this point you asked me to put a bet on, I would still say it's a first ballot victory for Poilievre. It wouldn't surprise me if they are kind of running around right now covering all those bases, because something else to note is that, probably the first positive poll for Charest came out this week showing that, he might be better off as leader of the Conservatives compared to Poilievre in a federal election in terms of, winning those, swing voters we always talk about. It's hard to say how much that poll matters, but it's like the first bit of positive news for Charest. And, it can't help but make you a little nervous if you're in that campaign.
May I just say two things in response to what the two of you have just said? The first is, I think Rudyard's point about Harper's message targeting pre-existing Conservative members over this infusion of new members that the Poilievre campaign has signed up is precisely right. Think about it, guys. Stephen Harper hasn't been leader of the Conservative Party for 7 years. If you're a younger voter who's entered politics essentially for the first time through the Poilievre campaign because of gatekeepers and housing and crypto and God knows what else, Stephen Harper's just wouldn't have the same kind of salience in terms of an endorsement. If you're 18, you were 11 when he left federal politics. So I think you're exactly right that this is less about trying to galvanize these new voters and more about speaking to those who really trust Stephen Harper, which is the longstanding Conservative Party base. The second thing I'd just say on substance, if there's one thing I know about Mr. Harper, it's his kind of clarity of thought and precision. And the one phrase in his comments that struck me, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something about challenging those institutions that have let us down or failed Canadians. And I interpreted that as a defense of Poilievre's criticisms of the Bank of Canada in general and Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada in particular. So at a time when, both the mainstream media and even kind of centrist conservatives are criticizing Poilievre on the grounds that this is that his critique of the Bank of Canada and his commitment to fire the bank governor is somehow beyond the pale. You have in Harper, a former prime minister, an effective kind of institutionalist saying, no, guys, this isn't beyond the pale, that there is a justification here. And he didn't have to, kind of explicitly say it, but I think it was the backdrop of that particular comment, which struck me as interesting.
One final kick at this can, then we'll go on to our second topic. And let me just play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Harper, to his credit, was a political leader and a conservative who held a party together with diverse factions with some pretty radical views. At the time when Harper was leader, he comes from, in a sense, the pre-populist, pre-Trump political stock of the G7 advanced industrial nations of the world. I mean, what does it mean, Stuart, when you have someone like Stephen Harper endorsing Pierre Poilievre, who let's go through the list, guys. I mean, let's be honest here. This is a politician out of self-interest or belief who's fraternizing with a lot of populist means, and Sean's listed them, whether it's crypto, whether it's the Bank of Canada, the whole gatekeepers narrative, fine. That's good, fair politics. But what I don't like and what confuses me a bit about Harper's endorsement, when I talk to my Jewish friends, this skepticism and footsie playing with the WEF haters, I think has a whiff of anti-Semitism to it. You have to remember that this is the oldest and most pernicious smear, that there is a cabal of rich, mysterious people pulling the strings of governments around the world. And the fact that Pierre Poilievre has, as a matter of policy, indicated that his ministers, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe his policy is that his ministers will not attend WEF-style events. I don't know. For me, that was really a line too far. And I hope at some point he walks that back, because I think there's something toxic there. Yet Stephen Harper was one of the most, I think, staunch, rightly so, supporters of Israel and the Jewish community. And I'm just wondering, I get it. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. It makes for compromises. But frankly, guys, that's a bridge too far for me.
Yeah, so the World Economic Forum thing, it is beyond the pale. Like, it is one of those things that if I had my preference, no mainstream politician would touch that. And I think that was probably a mistake by Poilievre. I had never actually considered it as,
Stuart, if it was a mistake, walk it back. Walk it back, because this is not just off the cuff crypto stuff. And actually, crypto's up the last couple of weeks, so maybe to Pierre's credit. But this other stuff, this is toxic, guys. I mean, we can debate the convoy and mandates, but this WEF stuff, man, come on, guys. We got to call anti-Semitism out when we see it, in whatever guise and dress up it appears in. And this is sending a message to a certain constituency out there who are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. This is bad stuff.
Yeah, maybe that was the impetus for Harper's endorsement, is this crypto portfolio was going up, and that association with Poilievre was just good. Maybe call me naive, and maybe it's just because I sort of resolutely don't want to go down these rabbit holes, but I'd never clocked the WF thing as anti-Semitic. I saw it as sort of crazy, and I see what you mean, how it does have some kind of parallel to a lot of those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. But more than anything, it's just really dumb. There is a lot of criticisms you can make to a lot of these sort of Davos, UN type things, where the self-importance is massively out of scale compared to the actual usefulness of these organizations. And I think there's a lot of really normal criticisms you can make. It's the same with the WHO and the pandemic, which screwed up a lot. But then there is a line where it just gets kind of nutty, but I think this is something we kind of have to reckon with, because if you've seen the Leslyn Lewis campaign emails, 50% of them are about WEF. So, if I had my preference, these mainstream candidates wouldn't touch it, but there's definitely something going on here.
Let me say two things on this topic. First of all, I seem to recall one of Prime Minister Harper's most important policy speeches over the course of his tenure as Prime Minister was in January 2012 at the World Economic Forum, where he, amongst other things, pre-positioned the change to the old age security program, which was a big deal at the time. So there is a kind of cognitive dissonance in it within conservative politics, that in basically a decade, we've gone from a conservative prime minister using the World Economic Forum as a platform to make major policy pronouncements and promote Canada as a place where big reform was happening and where investment was welcome, to now, as you say, are the front runner making his opposition to the World Economic Forum a kind of central part of his message. The second thing I'd say is the right critique of the World Economic Forum is not that it's running the world's governments from behind the curtain. It's that it's completely irrelevant, right? These guys can't tie their own shoelaces. Every month there's a new Industrial Revolution 4.0 or 5.0 paper that is read amongst a small and mostly irrelevant group of what David Goodhart described as the anywheres, but the idea that Klaus Schwab is running global governments, I think, gives Mr. Schwab far too much credit. And that's actually the proper critique of the World Economic Forum, is that it is not that it's not its reach. It's in some ways how constrained it is. And I guess just the bigger point I'd make, and this is something that David Frum has raised a lot on our bi-weekly podcast, which is conservatives across the Anglosphere need to start to articulate a vision of globalization that probably doesn't look quite like it did before the pandemic or before we came to, I think, fully appreciate the expansionary ambitions of China. But we can't go back to where we were pre-1980s, right? That there's a kind of mid-ground here, and conservatives need to be the ones communicating that vision, because for a lot on the, for those on the kind of left these days, there's been a kind of flip-flop, hasn't there? That the kind of open borders, anti-nationalism, kind of globalism message is increasingly concentrated on the left. And so if we're going to have a kind of responsible globalization, it's going to have to come from conservatives. And that's just another example of a big picture issue that hasn't been part of this leadership campaign.
Great analysis, as always, Sean. Just conscious of our time, so I'm going to skip our usual break and not subject our audience to my dulcet tones trying to convince them to become a Hub member. But hey, if you want to join, go to our website, www.thehub.ca. Let's just, in our remaining moments, we're trying to keep these shows to an efficient half hour and a tad, talk about what's happened in the United States this past week in terms of a second quarter of negative GDP. And I mentioned this not to do a deep dive into the US economy and what may be driving this economic downturn, but to talk instead about the potential reverberations here in Canada. You know, the old adage, when, the United States sneezes, we come down with the bubonic plague, vis-a-vis our economies, has held for a long, long time. And there's signs now, I think, in Canada. We'll see. We've got some monthly GDP numbers today, but more importantly, the quarterly GDP coming up. Stuart, let me start with you. I mean, how much do you think this is on the minds of voters? I feel like we're in this summer. I feel like people are aware of it, but it's not really internalized yet. Economic anxiety, while there, I don't know. To me, it doesn't feel like it's reached any kind of crescendo yet. The restaurants are full. People are traveling. There is, I feel, a moment of that kind of post-pandemic high that's going on right now. Get on with your life, do all the things on the bucket list. Does this all come home to roost in the fall?
Yeah, I think so. And that, I think we've had that sort of low-lying anxiety about rising prices. I think that is, it's just a frustration people feel, and actually gas prices are going down. So I think that's a big psychological boost for a lot of people, because that's the price you always see. It's the one that hurts the most every time you fill up your car. So I think we are in a bit of a lull now, but this is what is also happening right now is the housing market is undergoing the beginnings of a correction. And I think this is going to be more of an issue than maybe I realized, because prices are definitely going down. I know that from, having friends and relatives in the market at the wrong time to be in the market. Things are starting to happen. We saw a recent, I think it was an RBC report saying something like a 40% correction by the time this is over in 2023. Even if it comes close to that, say 30% or even 25%, that is going to affect people who are in sort of the latter stages of their lives. They're in retirement. They were hoping to sell their home. They probably got excited during the pandemic that they were going to get this huge windfall from their home when they do sell it. And now that's coming down to earth. Pair that with a recession, pair that with any kind of economic strife. And I think you have a serious problem for a federal government that is going to be relying on those voters at some point. So I think, there was some speculation about a fall election. That would be insane to me if that were to happen, because there's so many unknowns. And the deal that Trudeau has with the NDP that takes us, theoretically to 2025, that's about the time you would think this stuff starts to clear up. So maybe they've got some good economic minds in the Liberal Party who said, you guys are going to want some shelter for the next couple of years, and then you can think about going to the polls, because I think it's going to get a little bit ugly.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. The former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has said in recent days that historical analysis tells us that when in the U.S. economy, inflation is more than 4% and unemployment is less than 4%, the likelihood of a recession within 12 to 24 months is very high. And right now we have in the U.S. inflation at 9% and unemployment at 3%. So I was on television earlier this week, and the host asked me, what should the Canadian government be doing to try to mitigate the effects of inflation and achieve a soft landing? And I said, yeah, we need to talk about what Tiff Macklin's doing and what Chrystia Freeland is doing, and we can debate policy on the margins. But the truth is, so much of what Canada's economy is going to look like in the next 12 or 24 months is what happens in the United States, as Rudyard said. And all signs look pretty tough. And so, as Rudyard said, we'll have Q2 numbers out next month in Canada. We managed to achieve positive growth in Q1. I think there's a strong likelihood we're into negative growth in Q2, in effect matching what's happening in the United States. And the kind of political economy consequences of that, as Stuart says, could be significant across the country. One thing I've said a couple of times in different venues is it just seems like, I don't know if you guys agree with this, that we seem to be kind of moving from crisis to crisis. We've gone from the pandemic to now concerns about inflation and now growing expectations of a recession. I just think that is going to exhaust people, and it's going to cause people to want to punish governments. And so that's the kind of funny thing, right? We're having this debate about Poilievre and Charest and the future of the Conservative Party. But the truth is, the next federal election outcome may happen irrespective of who's leading the Conservative Party of Canada because of these economic conditions. What's your take, Rudyard?
Yeah, just two final observations. One, not to say that a fall election is likely, but if you were trying to think of the window to squeak in under before the opportunity closes, because the economy truly is in recession, housing is correcting, you have the misery index kind of soaring. Well, it will be this fall. So I think if there is a chance for an election, we're going to see that happen, and we'll know sooner rather than later. And then you're right, Stuart. I think the window closes for an extended period of time. My second observation, again, to mention Larry Summers, is, in his, as usual, excellent. And this was commentary this week, but this guy was also pretty prescient about warning on inflation over the last 18 months.
Only him and Pierre Poilievre got it right.
Yeah, he said, in a sense, that based on past inflation fights and the extent to which the United States is at full employment plus right now, you have to match demand with supply. And his view was that, the Fed and the markets and everyone are assuming, a kind of terminal rate for interest rate hikes in the 3.5, 3.7, 3.8 range. He and other economists are saying, it could be more like 5%. And, if the U.S. Federal Reserve has to take interest rates, overnight rates to 5%, we are going to have to follow for currency reasons, for all kinds of factors are going to drive us, if not to match, to go beyond what would be a comfort zone and a half for, especially for homeowners and for variable rate owners. So, this last week has been interesting because, markets have boomed, crypto's up, oil was up too. It breached $100 a barrel again. Financial conditions have actually loosened. And you can see, in a sense, this struggle. And this is what we're going to have to watch over the coming quarters. There's some schools out there, David Rosenberg and others, who think that inflation is going to come down exceedingly fast. And again, we're talking about the rate of change. So it's not about getting rid of all the inflation that's happened. That's really a tragedy because it's happened. The 7-8% in Canada, you've lost that purchasing power for good. And if you're low income and your wages are not keeping up, that's purchasing power for food, groceries, education, everything that's gone away pretty much forever, unless we have a bout of deflation. Unlikely. So, think about this, I think, carefully, because we could have a scenario where, inflation remains sticky. What's going to happen in Europe this fall? Putin's turning off the gas. Energy prices are going to soar. Supply chains could snarl this time out of Europe. Certainly, inflation, the purchasing producers index soaring, in Germany as German confidence reaches levels not seen during the height of the pandemic. I think there's a lot of complacency out there and a lot of kind of magical and wishful thinking that this whole inflation thing is going to go away by Q1, Q2, 2023. The markets will rip, mortgage rates will come down, and it's back to the kind of low interest rate, free money world of the post great financial crisis. And I just think if you're thinking of that way, you might be right. What do I know? But at the same time, be careful, because the 1970s would say this is a longer, slower grind to get inflation out of the system, when all the central banks, Tiff Macklem and Chairman Powell this week, were explicit about a 2% inflation target, not 2.5, not 3%, not 4%. So they got to get from 8-9% rate of change down to 2 at $100 a barrel of oil. Sorry, that doesn't work.
Yeah, can I just mention something here? It's great analysis as always, Roger. And I just can't help but think that this opens up an opportunity to start to talk about kind of reconceptualizing the way we've done economic policy making. There's so much of our growth for the better part of a decade have come from the kind of world of intangibles, whether it's software or the internet on one hand, or in the Canadian case, housing wealth. And, it seems to me...
or just rank financialization of everything and everything.
Exactly. And the crux of this runaway inflation is this massive supply crunch, because we've tied our economy up into knots with regulation and mandates, et cetera. The Harvard economist Ed Glaeser distinguishes between what he calls rich person entrepreneurship and poor person entrepreneurship. If you want to create an app, we have a live and let live attitude. If you want to open a hot dog stand or a laundromat, start writing the paperwork now. And here's where, again, if Poilievre can start to, Ben Woodfin wrote for us on this a couple of weeks ago. If he can start to pivot from a kind of rhetorical poise about gatekeepers to a policy agenda focused on galvanizing the supply side of our economy, he could be fishing with dynamite here. But that's up to Poilievre to kind of seize the opportunity.
Yeah, and let's drop the WEF stuff. Man, walk that back. I really think if his campaign is thinking about actually governing, he's got to walk that back before the vote in September. Okay, guys, that's a wrap up for this edition of Hub Dialogues, our weekly roundtable with Stuart Thompson, our editor-in-chief, Sean Spear, our editor-at-large. We'll do this all again next Friday, guys. Have a great long weekend.
Take care, gentlemen.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this special Friday edition of the Hub Dialogues for subscribers only. I hope you've enjoyed the program. If you have a comment or suggestion about the show, an issue, a topic, an idea that you'd like us to cover on our regular Friday subscriber-only Hub Dialogues, please send us an email to info@thehub.ca. Also, check out our website, www.thehub.ca, for tons of great analysis and insights about the big issues and ideas shaping our world and Canada's future. While you're there, if you'd like to, consider becoming a donor. We'd love to have your support. Simply click on the donate button. We'll send you a charitable tax receipt, and you'll get a whole series of great benefits and perks that come with being a Hub donor. This edition and every edition of the Friday subscriber-only Hub Dialogues are produced by Ricky Gerwitz. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, the Executive Director of the Hub. Talk to you again next Friday. Bye-bye.